Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. And I want to thank everybody for coming today. Here we have a situation where we've had horrible things happen all summer long. Now we're getting into a situation where more horrible things are about to happen, in my opinion. We're going to talk about all these shootings that are happening. And I don't know if you're counting, but the numbers are going way up, especially the number of people who are impacted by these year by year and how it's still going up year by year. I was actually a famous political consultant years ago during famous high profile campaigns in Los Angeles for movie stars, and then got called to Washington, D.C. for the first time in my life in 1990 to help the FBI open its big center, the Robert Byrd Center in West Virginia, to put all their big servers there. Then I did a thing for the Washington Navy Yard, a risk assessment for them on whether it was okay to put giant mainframes on dirt floors out near the water. No, the answer. And then patent and trademarks, and then they made it a rule that you have to do risk assessments. So then recently, about 15 years ago, I got into working with hospitals because they had this new CMS requirement coming. So that was something that we worked really hard on and did a lot of work with, and still it's one of my primary companies that I work with are hospitals. It's a big deal, and it's so critical too. So that's the other thing to it. It is like completely just horribly critical that you can do these kind of things and that you can make a difference with this. And so I've written a lot of requirements too for the Coast Guard after 9/11, for Department of Justice on assessment models, on medication errors in children, in pediatric patients, because the doses are so small. Did that with the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. And I work with like hundreds of clients now, pretty much all over the world. And I'm still sort of getting a little bit frustrated because no matter what I do, it just seems like it's not getting any better. And I talk to CEOs and they worry about having an active shooter too. Everybody does. It's the number one issue. It keeps management up at night, especially in schools for some reason, just seem to be the target. And I'm sure you all saw over the weekend what happened with just two brothers who looked like nice, normal guys going around and shooting 19 people all over Canada. And then the younger brother killed the older brother, and then last night he killed himself. So that was the end of that. But to have a crime spree of shooting 19 people completely at random in different locations is just something that it's even surprising when we see it here. So there's some things that you need to know about how to see what your risk is. Now, one of the things we offer now is a one-day risk assessment just on your active shooter risk. We could do that on site, could do that online, either way, because it's not the things that you'd expect. And so the first thing to do is we have to look at your threat profile. So there's all sorts of these things happening. Domestic terrorism, you'll see all these things referenced as we walk through here. In fact, I was surprised when I woke up and found out that LA, or Irvine, where my brother still lives in Orange County, California, is scheduled to have a hurricane today, a major hurricane in Southern California. Like, who ever heard of something like that? Shootings, tornadoes, floods. And so the first thing to know is how likely this is to happen to you. And again, this is looking at social media information, the joys of working at home with pets. So I thought if you want to see what one of the numbers that I work with and what work I do is a uniform crime index put together by the FBI every year based on zip code. And if you want to just pick some places where this is, you can look at Parkland, Florida, which has a score of 77 out of 100. And that means 23% of the United States is safer than Parkland, Florida, just 23%. That's low. Washington, D.C., which I expected to be not very good because I lived there for years, gets a 5. And that means 95% of the U.S. is safer. And if you want to send me your city and state, just send me your city and state, and I'll run this for you. It's on a computer program, and I can tell you what your risk is. So this is Boston, Massachusetts, and this is wrong. This should be like 78% of the U.S. is safer than Boston. Beverly Hills, California, which you think could be absolutely safe, 90 is a 7, almost the same as Washington, D.C. 93% of the U.S. is safer than Beverly Hills. And then let's pick something from the middle of the country, Boise, Idaho, where I have a good friend, and again, has a 30, and that means 70% of the U.S. is safer than Boise, Idaho. So that's just one of the factors that we put in. But again, it's compared against the whole United States. So it's significant to see where you are and just what your general uniform crime rate is. They just put out another terrorism bulletin, a domestic terrorism, at the beginning of the summer on June 7th. I put the link here. You can just click on it and and I would still recommend that you send this out to everybody, because I think with the elections coming up again, the second half of this year is going to be difficult. So I would recommend that you take this and you put a little memo with it and just send it out to everybody, or don't put a memo with it. Just put, please read this. We're at the point where that's going to what it takes. So there's two things going on here. One is that crime is going up astronomically, as you see from the weekend or any time else. And the other thing is that the damages for it are going up astronomically. And that is illustrated by this next risk alert that I'm going to show you. These risk alerts, I've been putting them out for 6 years now for no charge. This one is number 1578, but August 3rd, Dallas, Texas. And so they're just one page, so they're easy to read. And they're also a good thing to use if you're a security manager, director, or facilities manager and director, and you want to raise everybody's awareness. You can actually take the one for that week and use it in your briefing for your own staff. And we have a little program that we're going to be developing that you can get too. So it's like everyone will have like a little lesson plan with it, so you can make people aware of what's actually going on out there. So this was an cable installer. I picked this example because it applies to everybody. Everybody has a cable installer at some time in their life. And this was a lady who was an 83-year-old grandmother, and her cable installer went. He saw credit cards laying around, money laying around her house. So he went back the next day, even though he really didn't have to. He told her he did. He went back and he stabbed her to death. So first a jury found that Charter Communications, which is the parent company of Spectrum, was grossly negligent in her death. Not because of what you'd think, but because they never verified his employment records. He lied about his work history. He said it was fantastic. He had all sorts of red flags. He had felonies, had been arrested, all these things. But Spectrum and Charter, by example, because they're the parent company who requires their franchisees, right, to do these background checks on the installers, they didn't. So they said that both of these companies were grossly negligent, and that most of the red flags were completely ignored by his supervisors, even when he started doing weird stuff right where he was. So and they even charged the dead grandmother for the service call and also put it on her credit report. And the jury in this case awarded the family $378 million in compensatory damages and said that the parent company must pay 90% of the damages. A judge who heard the case laid in and said that Charter has to pay an additional $7 billion to one family for killing the grandmother. And he said in his verdict, the jury in this case was thoughtful and attentive to the evidence. This verdict justly reflects the extensive evidence regarding the nature of the harm caused by Charter Spectrum's gross negligence and reckless misconduct. For the safety of the American public, we can only hope that Charter Spectrum and its shareholders are listening. So again, this is something you're going to see again and again. In fact, the Uvaldis, five of the Uvalde families put in a $5 billion lawsuit against the school, against the county, against everything within like 3 days of that attack happening. So it's something that's gonna see over and over again. This is just something that amazed me. This was in Missouri, and this is a nurse and a paramedic were stabbed, where they were stabbed to death and left with serious injuries at SSM Health DePaul Hospital. A lady walked in, she opened her purse, she took out a big knife, and she started stabbing people in the emergency room, including a nurse and paramedic. And I guess the nurse was hurt badly, stabbed in the back and the neck. And she said, I heard somebody say she had a knife. So I looked up and saw a woman. She was stabbing the nurse. All the workers were rushing to help her. And all these things I'm talking about, a lot of them are being broadcast throughout the whole hospital on the message boards because somebody pressed a button. So now everybody can watch it. And what's bad about this one is it's an example of what's happening now. People go in and you talk to your management. You say, we really need money for this. And they go, well, it's really too much. We don't want to do that right now. Let's wait and see what happens. And in this case, they had actually been asking the hospital administrators for years and said that online to add more security guards and metal detectors. And so they weren't surprised when they heard about the stabbing. So these were 100% preventable because the staff there knew they were likely to happen because the security was so bad. And one person who no longer works at the hospital said, when you're working at DePaul, you're literally walking down the halls looking over your shoulder. And believe it or not, I actually had another client of mine up in upstate New York who, when I called him and told him about this, he got the risk alert, and he said, "Yeah, we hired one of those people. One of the people actually moved to New York to get away from these hospitals that aren't paying any attention." And again, they said, that it's unthinkable and unconscionable to take the life of medical professionals who are on duty trying to save us. That's what the prosecuting attorney said. The woman who was 30 years old was taken into custody and with a bail set at $2 million. So it's sort of ironic that the people who requested more security were the ones who were attacked. And of course, after that happened, what a surprise, the management came out in the news and said, 1 week after they were stabbed, they said, "Oh yes, several months conducting an extensive system-wide evaluation of our physical environments. We're seeking input from team members who participate in our workplace violence committees. And a result of the evaluation, improvements will be made to the entire system." They don't mention that the fact that these two people were horribly stabbed has something to do with it. So I guess as long as they do it, that's good enough for me. And one of the things they added were metal detectors. So I'm going to go back and we're going to talk about metal detectors in a minute, because I think metal detectors are the future. It's the only way to stop this epidemic that we're seeing. And just speaking of an epidemic, here are active shooter incidents in the United States. This is a report put out again by the FBI every year. So this is showing what happened in 2020 compared to what happened in 2021. And the next June, we'll get the one from 2021 to 2022. But you could just see how I remember the first stabbing. I was working in security way back then, the first shooting in Columbine. And I remember exactly the bedroom I was in. I remember I was cleaning up and making the bed, I got some fresh sheets out of the closet, and I saw this on TV, the Columbine thing. And that's what set this whole thing in motion somehow. And so you can see here, just as how it's going, this is just how it went up in the last year. 40 incidents in 19 states. In 2021, 61 incidents in 30 states. Casualties, 164, and of those, 38 were killed. In 2021, 243 casualties with 103 killed. So both of those were like times 3. One law enforcement officer killed in 2022 and 2021. How many wounded? 11 in 2020. They learned from that year, 5 in 2021. How many of these incidents met the mass killing definition, which is 4 more people in a populated area. So again, 5 met the definition in 2020 and 12 met in 2021. Incidents where law enforcement engaged the shooters, 8 in 2020. 17 in 2021. The shooters, again, predominantly male, 42. Out of the 42 incidents in 2020, 35 were male. In 2021, out of the 61 incidents, 60 were male. Again, no big deal with body armor. The shooters who committed suicide were mostly older. The young people usually surrender. They don't commit suicide. If you're over 50, you commit suicide. Shooters killed by law enforcement. And it's something I would print this out when I send you this video. Print this page out and just put it on your management's desk, because I had one guy who was an administrator of a large hospital chain called me back and said, "That's what really got me when I saw how these things had gone up from a low from 164 to 243. Such a long time after Columbine's still happening, So why is this still happening? Revenue factors. It initially prevented some hospitals from putting in controls, so they were like behind the curve. They were worrying about all this other stuff, taking this seriously. And then I still see because I'm talking to people every day, I still get this "it can't happen here" mentality. And that's the first thing I thought of when the Uvalde shooting happened at the school, was that they were talking on the news. The first thing they're saying was, "It's such a close-knit community, nothing bad ever happens here. Everybody knows everybody. We all love each other." And okay, if you all love each other so much, why are there a bunch of dead children who bled out in the classroom? I don't get that. They don't see that that's a dichotomy, that you can't have both. You can't be a wonderful, close-knit community and have children, so many, 19 children being killed. So again, older administrators especially, they don't want to have controls that people can see. They're fine for something if you can't see it, but they think it's going to think of people, that they're going to think the hospital is dangerous, which of course is not true. But it's not, it's also a place because it's open 24 hours a day, so there also, many aren't aware of the fines that they get. We even had the worst year, forget all the other stuff, we had the worst year for fines fines in the history of HIPAA. Value of breach of personal information. It's because people are going out to steal this stuff, and they're successful part of the time. Again, your current administrators, I had one where I went to a big hospital chain in Texas, County Hospital, and they said, well, we're not interested in what you're doing. I was there doing a risk assessment on that major hospital, but the administrators didn't even know I was there. The security person didn't tell them, HR didn't tell them, safety didn't tell them. They didn't know what I was doing there. And I said, well, let me get my laptop and show you, So I got my laptop out and I showed them. And at the end, they were like glued to the screen. They had no idea that these fines were happening. They had no idea that their exposure was so bad and that they're likely to get, $250,000 fines for this. And again, these wrongful death lawsuits, which are coming up all the time. And since CMS in 2017, a lot of these things are required. It's not just a choice anymore. So again, you can see now that this isn't slowing down. Even if it's a known problem, it happens more today than it did last year. It's at least 8 times more common in healthcare workers than it is in any other industry. In fact, OSHA said it's more dangerous than working on a high-rise building, working in an emergency room in the healthcare industry. 7 of 10 physicians, so now doctors are finally speaking up, said that violence in emergency departments increasing. Here's the HIPAA thing I told you about. Record year for settlements from enforcement of the law. Sorry about the typos. I just got this today and I was trying to squeeze it in before meet the deadline for time today. In 2018, the Office of Civil Rights, OCR, had to settle 10 cases and got one judgment for $28.7 million in fine, 22% higher than the previous record of $23.5 million, in part due to the largest HIPAA settlement in history of $16 million based on a 2015. It takes a while to go to court. It impacted almost 80 million consumers. So again, why is this just driving me crazy to do all this work and find out this is still happening? Because security is just not a mainstream issue with senior management. It's an afterthought. It's something they have to do. It appears on the balance sheet as an expense item. And so, what they usually do is they look at the budget and they take out all the expense items and do everything else. Well, they can't take out security. And it also still follows this outdated law enforcement model, which we'll talk about. And I just want to say I'm 100% into law enforcement. I'm on the executive committee, the Palm Beach Crime Prevention Association, made up of entirely police officers plus me and 2 other people. But the law enforcement model is that somebody does something bad, you go out and catch them, and then you turn them in, and then the justice system takes over. And that's not security. Security is you have to be more proactive than that. You have to solve these problems yourself. You can't just identify them and then hand them over to some other group to take care of them. So it's, again, this is a clash between these 2 things, and the fact that most people, when they get out of the police department, if they go in at 18, you figure they retire at 18, 28, 38, and they're ready to do something else. So they all, show up to work at a hospital. But the whole thing is completely different. And one of my friends, Mike D'Angelo, he wrote a book that you can get on Amazon about this in case that describes something you're trying to deal with. So again, the other problem I still see is this separation between, like, why is she talking about HIPAA on a facilities assessment, webinar? Because it's an artificial separation between physical security and IT security and technology. And that's why we never talk about ransomware and things like that, even though the same security awareness details matter to both those kind of things. It's not separated. It's the same thing. It's security. And again, people think that tech isn't embedded in these programs, and it absolutely is. Just the advances that we've made and the things that you can get now are just tremendous. So, but here we go back to the 1890 technology. And so these are just some of the recent shootings. All of these happened between May 1st and the end and middle of August. So this is Geneva Presbyterian Church in Orange County. No access control, of course, no weapons screening. And I will say I am working with some church groups now, and hopefully we're going to get some recommended guidelines for them. So what happened is that the shooter was Chinese. He hated Taiwanese people. The congregation here, I think the most they ever had at one service was 50. And they're all senior citizens. So what he did was he drove 2 hours to he brought a nail gun. He glued the church doors shut with super glue, and then he brought his loaded nail gun and nailed them shut, and then he chained them shut and put a padlock on the chain. Then he went out to a secret entrance in the back, walked in and shot 10 senior citizens who couldn't escape. They were between the ages of 75 and 90. The only younger person in the congregation was a doctor who drove his mother to church and went in with her, and he hit the shooter with a chair, and for that he was shot by the shooter and killed. But he did stop the shooter. Everybody laid on, jumped on the shooter and physically held him down till the police got there, and it was all just because the church members were Taiwanese. That's the only reason he did it. They were talking a little about Uvalde. That was in the news again today because the inspector general is now investigating this. And we had the Tulsa shooting on June 2nd, and this was completely healthcare. This was on the St. Francis Health System campus at 64th and Yale Streets in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and it was a medical building. And so this guy had spinal surgery, and then he went back and shot his doctors. In fact, he targeted Dr. Phillips, a surgeon who had operated him less than a month ago. When he was released from the hospital on the same day, he went to a gun shop and got an assault rifle from a local gun shop. And then he went back the next day to the hospital along with a 40 caliber Smith & Wesson semi-automatic handgun that he got from a pawn shop, and he killed the doctor dead. He killed the other doctor he found. And again, this was just a medical building on the campus, right? So what he did was he just ran up the stairs and up to the second floor, because again, there's no receptionist, there's no anything there. There was a receptionist there, but not a security officer type of receptionist. Ran up to second floor, killed his doctor, killed the other doctor standing there who had kids, family, everything, woman, lady doctor. And then that was it, so everybody was waiting outside. I have a real interesting picture of that. But again, he it's a painkiller thing. He didn't like what his doctor told him and killed him. This is, I think, 3 days after that, June 3rd. And this was a guy to the Encino Hospital Medical Center, which is a big medical center in Los Angeles County. And he pulled up in front, left his car in the street. He didn't even park it, and ran into the emergency room with his dog on a leash. And on the way in, what he did was he stabbed another doctor and some other people who were right there in the stabbing. One of the guy who was there watching was an ultrasound technician, and he told the radio station that before the stabbing, he told the person who had the dog with him, and he thought he was high on drugs because he looked anxious and was drenched in sweat. He went in to get medicine and anxiety, and they said no, and so he stabbed people. Spent 4 hours trying to talk him out of coming out of the emergency room with the SWAT team. So the medical building in Tulsa and the shooting we just talked about in Encino, was there concealed weapons screening there to enter the building? No. Was there anybody there, a security guard or anything to potentially stop somebody entering the building? No. Did they have panic alarms? No. Did they have a live receptionist? They did. They had a young receptionist, and he shot her first when he went through the lobby. There was no security presence there. There were no policies and procedures about what to do about this. And could the police response have been any faster? No, because they were already right there on campus. That's why I'm looking at concealed weapons detection screening to keep people out who have weapons. That's the only way we're going to stop all these killings, is be able to keep them out right at the front. And it's the same thing if you think about it. If you go home to your house tonight, and probably before you go to bed, what you're going to do is go around and make sure the doors are locked. You're not going to leave windows open so that somebody could crawl through. I'm sure you have a locker on your screen or window or something. And again, you're gonna do the normal things people would do to keep from being killed or be a target of theft or anything like that. It's the same thing for where you work. We have to put these things in place. So now we're hearing this thing in June now. Got the 71-year-old active shooter, the oldest active shooter on record, went to a potluck dinner at a church in Alabama that he didn't even know. People, he sat there and had dinner with them, and then he got up and shot two of them, and thought a third one who's died now, so he actually killed three. The second one died, the third one died a couple of days later. And again, he was having problems, his business had been out, and so he went to church for help and ended up killing three people. So again, when you talk about this with your management, because I'm going to want you to go back in and talk about it with your management to save lives, that's the whole point. That's why we're doing all this stuff, besides just a paycheck, you know? So again, what do they need to know? They need to know that safety and security are really about compliance and liability. And we're seeing this liability thing come right to the front, and the fines, which are not incredible. And the worst one is the CMS final rule on emergency preparedness. The OSHA general duty clause applies to everybody though. CMS is only healthcare, but every organization, it requires employers to maintain a safe environment free of recognized threats. So that goes back to the risk assessment. That's why you have to do the risk assessment, security assessment. You have to have it. You have to have the threats listed so that when they say, why did this happen here? Did you not pay attention to this? You go, no, because here's my risk assessment. And it said that these things were likely to happen. So because of this, we put in some screening in the front lobby. Because of this, we put in panic alarms in the upper floors, you know, all those kind of things. And they just signed off on the OSHA federal standard for workplace violence. It's become a law now. So this is the old version of this from 2013. This is OSHA 3148 for healthcare and social service workers. And this tells you what you have to do to prevent this, including ethical consideration. Tammy Baldwin introduced this in June also, the workplace violence prevention bill in the Senate, and it passed. And it had passed a year ago in the House. And now that it's going in through reconciliation, and it's going to have actually a federal law. It has 26 co-sponsors already and long overdue legislation. So we talk about solutions or really controls. That's what auditors call them, controls, and that's what they are. It's a control to prevent active shooters and workplace violence for healthcare and for everybody else. It's just healthcare has more restrictive laws as an industry, and it's everywhere. So that's why we use it as an example a lot of times. So again, A is for access control. So it just always starts with access control and making sure that people can't go places they're not supposed to be, not qualified to be in. Again, I guess these are sort of reversed. The first one should be doing the security risk assessments. They're required by OSHA, who calls them workspace assessments, work site assessment. But of course, CMS calls them security risk assessments. All hazard security risk assessments means that now they have to cover weather. They have to have first hurricane in Southern California, probably today, natural disasters, tornadoes, earthquakes, California, water, flooding in half the country, and drought and not enough water in the other half, the current policies and procedures, and the enforced entry, concealed weapons screening, which I think is absolutely required. And what I'm going to show you is how much different it is than what you get at the airport, because that's like the worst. So again, this is the CMS rule that affects 17 kinds of healthcare organizations, including ambulatory surgery centers. Any place you have healthcare going on that CMS is reimbursing, you have to have this done every year. The others, of course, the OSHA general duty clause, and again, this new standard. So now we're going to look at Uvalde. So here's the 77-page report that came out on July 17th. This will be a very active summer. Here's the report. I think you should download it and take a look at it. The first 70 pages are what happened and why it happened like it happened, and trying to excuse what happened as it happened. But the last 7 pages are the things that they have to change and they have to make differently. And one of the things is if your policy says that there's an active shooter over 12 years old now, I think, when it first on 60 Minutes, that when police arrive, they're not allowed to walk through the facility. They're not supposed to walk through the facility and stop and check and see if somebody's still breathing, if they see him dead in a pool of blood in the hall. Well, now they say you're supposed to go find the shooter and take the shooter out. That's the number one prime directive on this, active shooters now. Police arrive, they say, where is he? He's on the second floor. They have to run up the stairs, second floor, and take this guy out. They didn't do that here. They had 436 officers sitting outside waiting, and they never went in to stop the shooter. And so he killed all these children. This is what that report looks like. This is a guy with a picture of his daughter. These are the kind of controls that we look at, is doing the risk assessment primarily. So do we have access control for all the doors? Do we have an area of refuge where people can hide? And if I was If I could change the CMS rule, I would take that out, because I think that we had nothing but disaster where people go hide. You need to get away, you need to get someplace else, and you need to do something else, because that's just not going to work. You have to have some barriers at the front entry so that you can't drive a truck. Every month, a truck drives into the lobby of a hospital or an ambulatory surgery center. In fact, they often get stuck in the columns and pillars, because a lot of the people who are driving people to the healthcare appointments or to surgery, they're not that great of drivers. Maybe their eyesight's off. Maybe it's too bright and they can't see. But again, you have to have something to prevent them from driving in the entrance to your hospital or surgery center or hospice or whatever, because if they can, they will. Then you have to have a camera system. You got to be able to see what's going on everywhere. I've been to so many places where I say, "Where's your camera system? I want to see the monitor so I can see, the perimeter of the building around, from with the cameras." And they go, "Oh, it's locked in the IT closet." Okay, well, can you unlock it for me, please? Well, we could, but the IT guy doesn't get in today. He's taking the day off. He's taking the day off, and they don't even have a key to unlock the door so they can see what they're paying the cameras to record and observe. Just not there. Same thing, concealed weapons detection screening. So we're going to talk about this control, because in my opinion, this is the only control that's going to make people safe and stop it from happening. It's very inexpensive, and it's charged according to the size of your organization, because the people who are in this company, they had another company before and they cashed out, and they really want to save lives. So that's why they're doing this. It makes a difference. And again, it's not like the airport screening, as we'll talk about. Number one, you don't remember how when you go through the airport, you put your stuff in the gray thing, and there's somebody sitting there at the x-ray, and if she's having lunch, you have to wait till she has lunch before she looks at your stuff. Go through, look at it. There's none of that. It's automatic. It's got artificial intelligence built in. So it knows the combination of metals that will make a weapon up, make a knife up, make a gun up. So it can look at knives, and it can also look. The fur is flying around here. We're having a meltdown. The weapons detection plans you have, and plans are great. I love policies and procedures. I love plans, but they're just a piece of paper. They're just black type on a white piece of paper, unless somebody actually follows them and uses them. And the other half of that's the accountability of it, is there's got to be a penalty if they don't follow them. So that's one thing I'm advocating. Most of you by now have the mass notification systems, especially a lot of the ambulatory surgery center people. Emergency plan, CMS. So for hospitals, required to be updated every year. For other ones, maybe not so much. Again, because the policies change every year and the situation changes every year. Just like if you think about that horrible flood they had in Kentucky where 43 people died, they'd never had that before, but now it's going to have to go in their emergency plan, and they're going to have a way to fix that so that doesn't happen anymore. So that's part of the thing, is how you update these things and get them going. And then your incident reporting program, and then intrusion detection, of course. Even though it's not like people are sneaking in, they walk right in the front of the building, right into your lobby with their assault rifle, with a 23-year-old receptionist sitting there. Here's what happened. This is my little quick thing of Uvalde after reading the paper and everything. It can't happen here attitude. Didn't update their policies and procedures. When the guy, Ramos, the shooter, when he shot his grandmother in the face in his neighborhood and then stole her truck, there were neighbors out in the yard, and none of them moved. They didn't get up. In fact, noon, but like it's like active shooters work business hours. They do this between 9 in the morning and 5 in the afternoon, most popular times, Tuesday and Wednesdays of all things, not on a weekend or anything, but just like they get fed up in the middle of the week. The commander on the scene didn't get notified that 911 were calling from inside the classroom. They didn't allow the first responders in. They didn't complain about the shooter, even though it was public knowledge that he had problems. And again, there have to be consequences. Same thing with all these things. A lot of these things happen because the doors are propped open. There should be a fine for propping a door open. That's the only thing you can say. And again, this came out early that every level was affected. They were getting 911 calls from the children who were bleeding out in the classroom, were calling police dispatch, and they could not get anybody's attention. And again, continuing problems in healthcare also include restraining orders. Even if they get them, they don't do anything, and they don't really help. The violence in healthcare settings happens every day on all shifts and in all units of the hospital. And this is according to the Minneapolis Nurses Association, where they had that really bad shooting in bombs, homemade bombs in Minnesota at Athena Hospital, and I wrote an article about that's going to be printed in the Journal of Healthcare Safety and Security next month. And on the day of the shooting, not knowing that was going on, the nurses union sent out a release citing their 2019 survey saying 95% of its nurses in safe Minnesota said they don't feel safe from violence at work. And we also have the problem with prescription doctors who refuse to prescribe pain meds. And again, this is one thing, and this doctor said, it makes me ask about, he said when he heard about it and he was at the Mayo Clinic, the first thing I assumed was it something to do with pain medication. And then it makes me ask about our own workplace. How safe are we? And so you might want to ask yourself that about your own workplace. And I'd be happy to do a free little consult with you if you want to just talk about what you're doing, you have any questions. So again, the way to get out of this endless loop of death is concealed weapons detection screening, because it works so great. Over 50% of the healthcare hospitals, manufacturing's even worse, don't do any screening at all of anybody. They just trust people to come in. We had one in Philadelphia in June also, where the emergency nurse they had no screening there, so he came, brought his handgun to work with him, worked half his shift and shot himself in front of the patients and the doctor. And that's happening every single day. And so again, what do? We show them how bad it is, and then we say, here's a ticket out, the return on investment on weapons screening. So if we get a weapons screening program, it's going to prevent damage and death to our healthcare workers, going to be some way to show them we actually care about them. And the other thing it's going to do is it's going to prevent it from happening in the future, because as people get used to having lawsuits for this stuff, it's going to end. These lawsuits are $1 billion. A judge can tack on $1 billion if it feels like it's not right. And it also pays for itself because it cuts down on security officer requirement. It doesn't require to have somebody sitting there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you're paying, $20 an hour for that. This methodology, this is why I moved to Washington, D.C. from Southern California in 1990 to work with the Defense Department on a methodology for high value critical asset. And the critical assets can be the facility. In healthcare, it's the facility and the people and the devices, right? And it's required by every level of government. So local, city government has to do them, counties have to do them, federal level, FEMA, of course, the departments who actually invented the methodology on their high value physical security assets, physical facilities, works for them too. So we get into the return on investment. What we do is analyze how much the control costs, whatever the control is. Maybe it's a panic alarm. So I went to one big hospital down in Miami, and it had panic, but they thought they had panic alarms under every desk. So I had to, that's why I wear pants when I go out on site. I had to crawl under the counter and look, and sure enough, what it was, there were no buttons down there, no control buttons. Why? Because they replaced it, they remodeled, and they forgot to put the buttons back. So one of the things recommend is to do the security safety risk assessment every year, and the all hazards risk assessment every year. If you're not a worksite assessment, if you're not a healthcare organization, we have our guides here on how to do it. We update the emergency plans every year based on the fact that we had a flood here last year. So next year's plan, got to look at that. And then we look at these lawsuits, $27 million for two kids in a fight after they fired one person in the cracker factory in Philadelphia, $64 million lawsuit they lost. Stanford Health sued for $82 million, and they had to pay that much. And then outside of Chicago, for $7.8 million for being traumatized and raped by a patient. And it affects your funding from the states and counties. It affects liability. And again, it makes sure that people don't die, so it's really important to do this, follow the cycle of doing your assessment. Then you look at the threats and see if they're the same as last year, which is worse, find out what part of your assets are critical. And so this is like a critical relationship is a threat to the value of the asset. And the other critical relationship is the controls match to the threat. So if we buy this control, well, is it going to help anything or not? I find people spend money on things that they don't even need, and they avoid spending money on things that they do need. So we have to help them by quantifying the threat, how likely it is to occur. We have 7 decision points that make up that number. And then the same thing with the control. So we bounce control off the threat. Would it prevent this from occurring? Would it prevent rape? Would it prevent assault? Would it prevent homicide, and then we use all this threat data from all these different agencies with all these different numbers, and then we can put it together. So if we see that in our office, our hospital, assault occurs 5 times a year, and industry data says it also happens 5 times a year, and the Uniform Crime Index is a 12, which is really, really low, we can average these numbers together. So we got 5 and 5 is 10, got 22 divided by 3, and that gives us our threat number of 7. That's the likelihood that threat would occur where we are and cause a thing. So again, this company called me Entryway Security. It's Athena-security.com, and they showed me their program, and I actually went to sit down with them at a show, and they showed me how it worked. And so it's got all this artificial intelligence in it, including how to identify individuals instantly, how to maintain a traffic flow of 3,000 to 4,000 people an hour just walking through, because you don't have to take off your belt, you don't have to take off your shoes, you don't have to take out your cell phone, you don't have to do anything, you don't have to take out your keys, your watch, nothing. You just walk through, and because they have these algorithms that tell you exactly what you're looking at, that if they have a knife, there's a profile for a knife, and there's only about 2 or 3 of the companies that do this. You don't need a sure shot, you don't need a shot detection to know you had a shooting in the parking lot. What you have to do is keep them out of the building. You can't get the note that there's somebody shooting in the parking lot and do nothing. Most people go to do a lockdown, they don't even do a lockdown, even though they're required to do it. So it's the way that people ignore the policies. Only weapons detection system that meets the federal standard from the NIH. Highest accuracy of the targets, so you don't have a lot of false positives. Highest throughput, 3,600 people per hour can just walk right through. Lowest nuisance alarm, that's the false positives. You can do it standalone or network. It's got a silent mode in case it's a critical care facility. Not harmful to humans, not the dated airport technology, and it's affordable. In fact, and this is the requirement, the NIJ, National Institute of Justice standard for this. And so this is what it looks like. It just got 2 pillars, and it's got a computer there on a stand. You just walk through, and it immediately will alarm and not let you go. In fact, you can lock the doors in the building where you have it set up, in the lobby where you can set up. It'll automatically lock the doors if it sees that you have a gun. And again, it detects it from the chemicals, not from anything else. And it detects more concealed weapons than any other screening system. So again, it's the control. The other controls are important, but you have to keep the weapons out if you want people to not die in your lobby. And again, we measure the controls. We look at how much they're in place. We come up with cost-benefit analysis for them. Bottom line, we guarantee compliance and reduce liability to prevent the active shooter incidents before they happen. I'm so tired of analyzing them after they happen. So we have to go in and talk to management about what we need to secure the facility based on identified threats that we have numbers for, that we can quantify and say, this is why this is important. And again, we've seen from all these lawsuits, lack of security. Well, Your Honor, we were thinking about it. We had it in our budget. 2 kids got killed, so it doesn't count. Lack of security is not a legal argument. So start by analyzing your current access control system, and then see about how to get some kind of a concealed weapons screening system in there so you can eliminate this threat from you. And again, by performing these things and then tracking and taking the recommendations and putting them into place, you get the best bang for the buck. If you'd like to find more information either about the concealed system, they'll do a demo for you if you want. You can contact me anytime, whatever you want to. So here's my email address. If you want to write down my phone number, it's 301-346-9055. This is Michael Green. He's the CEO of Athena Security, where they also want to save lives, and they work really hard at it, what they're doing. And they have this system called Entryway, and it can be scaled back for smaller places. You could even do a pilot of it if you want, for 3 months or 6 months. So anyway, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Feel free to email me, call me if you want an estimate on what it would be to do something like this, or we want me to arrange a demo for you on the Athena so you can see how easy it is to use. And any other questions you have about anything related to security, please give me a call anytime. Thanks a lot. Have a wonderful rest of the week. Bye-bye.